We'd like to welcome everyone to the Winchester Public Schools School Committee meeting on this election day, November 8th, and I will call the meeting to order at 6:05 p.m. We're happy to have you all here. We are doing this meeting virtually as we were unable to obtain a quorum this evening in person, so we have moved to the virtual format tonight. We will begin, as always, with public comment. I'll just remind our audience that public comment shall be for a period of 20 minutes. Any citizen wishing to speak before the committee shall identify themselves by name and address and shall speak for no longer than 3 minutes. No citizen may speak more than once without permission of the chair. And public comment is not a discussion, debate, or dialogue between the citizens and the committee. Dr. Hackett, do you see anyone?
We have no attendees this evening.
No attendees. Okay, then we will move right on. I will just let the committee know that both of our student reps had interviews for colleges tonight. I excused them from the meeting. That seemed an appropriate reason to be able to miss a school committee meeting. So good luck to them. And they are joining us at town meeting. I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in the meeting tonight. The first item on the agenda in your packet was a list of surplus technology. If someone would like to make a motion to approve surplusing that technology, I'll be happy to accept it under our consent agenda.
So
I have
moved.
a question, actually.
Okay, Mr. Nixon.
Yeah, so just given the number of devices, I wanted to ask, have we taken care to wipe any either identifying information or sensitive information from these devices across the board, whether iPads or Chromebooks?
Andrew, are you on?
And I'm asking because, you know, to do it, it's pretty simple, but it takes a certain amount of time and there's a significant number of devices. And so, you know,
Mr.
districts
Marin?
certainly face.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good evening. So it's actually part of our service. So they do that and certify it, and we get information back saying that they kind of destroyed all that information on there.
Have we used this service before for that purpose?
We have. Yep. Seems to be a vendor for the past couple of years.
Okay. And then for them to provide that service, are we giving them some sort of unique information or sensitive information to be able to open up those devices and wipe them?
Yes, there's a process to kind of deprovision them from our network, and then they have the ability, then they go in there and physically remove the hard drive and destroy it.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So I'll accept a motion.
You need a second.
I second. I thought there was a motion on
Was
it.
it?
Yep.
Yeah, motion's there.
So I'll need to take a roll call vote. Mr. Brady?
Aye.
Ms. Bolognese?
Aye.
Mr. Hopcroft?
Aye.
Mr. Nixon?
Aye.
Chair votes aye and it passes unanimously, and it occurs to the chair. I flew right past the superintendent, student rep, and chair remarks after letting you know that the student reps wouldn't be here this evening. Dr. Hackett, did you have anything that you wanted to share with the committee this evening?
I do not.
I would just like to take a minute at the top of the meeting then to thank the administration and staff at our high school. Particularly our Dean of Students and our adjustment counselors. They have been supporting students and staff this week through the tough loss of a member of the class of 22 and have been doing an extraordinary job in helping students and the staff come to terms with that loss. We'd also like to just let the family know that we hold this member of the community in our hearts and are greatly saddened for losing such a recent graduate of the high school. And I just wanted to take a minute to mention that this evening. Did any other committee members have anything to share under remarks?
I'm I'm happy to offer a couple of important notes. The select board voted unanimously last night, Madam Chair, to put the lynch question on the ballot for January 7th, as well as a modest operating override. I think they're seeking an adjustment in the tax levy limit that would amount to an additional $400,000 that would go towards the debt service for Lynch neighborhood safety traffic improvements. And that once that's paid off, whether that's 10 or 15 years down the road, there would be some additional revenue that would flow back to the capital stabilization fund. And they just took this vote last night. So obviously there's a bit of a runway for them in terms of articulating this. I think they're going to be bringing some information to town meeting to share with us.
Thanks, Mr. Nixon. That helps close a little bit of a loop on wondering where that traffic was going to land. I appreciate you sharing that with the committee. Any other members? Just like to thank everybody who got out and voted today as well. If you haven't done so and you're watching our committee meeting, remember it's virtual and you can still get to the polls. So if you haven't voted, please do so. And with that, we will move on to the consideration of approval of our WPS and superintendent goals for this evening. These goals were presented and we had a nice discussion about them in our last meeting by Dr. Hackett. And they are on our agenda tonight simply for a vote and approval, unless anyone else has any discussion about them, or Dr. Hackett, if there were any other additional things that you wanted to add.
No, I think the discussion in the last meeting was good and clear, and I have not received any feedback in between. So if the committee is in a position to vote to approve, then that would be great.
I'll make a motion to approve the goals as written.
I'll second it.
I'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Brady.
Aye.
Ms. Bolognese.
Aye.
Mr. Hopcroft.
Aye.
Mr. Nixon.
Aye.
The chair votes aye, and our goals have passed unanimously. Thank you very much to the committee and to Dr. Hackett and the leadership team for all the background work and conversations that develop goals to really reflect our district and where we want to move forward. So thank you for that. The next item on our agenda would be the October 1st verified enrollment report. And Dr. Hackett, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about that.
Well, thank you. I have this a little bit out of order. So
Okay.
what I'm going to present tonight really is it's just a really snapshot. It's a very high level overview or of the numbers that we reported to DESE. Even though this is the October 1st enrollment report, the actual report was not due to DESE until Friday of last week. So we've known kind of where the numbers have been trending, but even though it was due on Friday of last week, these still reflect the numbers as we had them on October 1st. But I believe the department gave some additional time. I know there was obviously, coming out of the pandemic, there was a lot of movement and shifting that I think they needed some additional time to get to the point of certification. So overall, I'll just explain this briefly. You can see the school year starting 18-19, 19-20, 20-21, and then the school year that was last year, our total enrollment was at 4,301. As you may recall, as we brought the budget forward and tried to forecast what we thought the enrollment might land coming into the school year, our total enrollment projection was 4,210. That included a projection of about 300 kindergarten students, which, coming out of the pandemic and this year and the data and the way the data have been, I think Mr. Rowe did a great job with it. It was a tough lift to do that. And, you can see that we landed at 4,269. None of that additional, we did not need any additional staffing to cover the additional students over the budget from the perspective of general classroom. So we were able to absorb the additional students that came to us. and it is moving forward. We obviously we have a lot of work to do around the FY24 budget, and we'll have to make some decisions once again, about the enrollment projections moving forward. And just to give you a sense of kind of the trends that we're seeing, and I use the word trend very loosely, because we still really, I think we're just in a different time. I think it's difficult to project enrollment, and I think it will be difficult to project enrollment for the next several years until things stabilize a little bit. But as you can see, this top line is a K through 5 enrollment. You can see there's a decrease in our K through 5, which was partly projected anyway, based on the numbers that we had pre-pandemic. You can see that the grades 9 through 12 actually has increased. The high school has more students this year than what we had both last year at the 1349, and also at what we budgeted the high school to have at 1344. So that number is up. Interestingly, we had some of these represent returns, but some of these are actually new students. And then the middle school is trending a little bit higher too. We had 1,059 students in 21-22. That's October 1 of 21. We were projecting through the budget process 999. Mr. Rowe brought it right to the nickel. And then we ended up at October 1 with 1,037. So we are up at the secondary level, which is good. And I think, part of that is that we did have students returning from private options that they chose during the pandemic. But we also saw a little bit of a bump that I think is attributable to new students in town. So that is the high level snapshot overview. There's obviously a lot of data that is behind this. We have back years as well, but I wanted to present that to you tonight because it hasn't even hit the DESE website yet.
And I just wanted to let the committee know that we wanted to make sure we got these numbers to the committee here as soon as possible. Obviously, there have been other committees in town interested in taking a look at these as well. And we want to make sure that you always are getting the information first pertaining to the schools. So we brought that here tonight. And as Dr. Hackett said, hopefully tonight we're just going to sort of keep the conversation at a high level, remembering that several years ago, this committee had agreed to only present enrollment data that was based on actual DESE October 1st numbers, so that we were using the same number all the time. I would say the only deviation we've made from that this evening is that we did talk about student enrollment as a budget number in FY 22-23, and I think it is instructive for us as a committee to be able to see the delta between what we budgeted for and what our actuals are, particularly in that a few of those are a bit higher than they have been than they were budgeted for.
The only other thing that I would add is just to make sure that everyone understands this is K through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12. So preschool numbers are not in here. When you go on the DESE website, you will see preschool numbers built into the overall enrollment chart. So when you're looking at the total enrollment, make sure that once they get this posted, you need to subtract out the preschool students. They've also separated out in a conversation I had with a committee member earlier today, and I did not know this, but apparently out-of-district placement students were at one point part of the overall enrollment count. There's a whole separate section for our out-of-district placements. Obviously, we don't; those students are claimed by the school to where they go, so they're not part of our enrollment. But obviously, we are also paying tuition for those students. So there is support from our budget for those placements.
And obviously, Dr. Hackett will have time to discuss some of those cost centers and enrollment numbers a little bit later when we are moving forward in the budget season. Mr. Nixon.
Yeah, thanks. So just on that point, I was going to make a request. I think on the slide we're looking at now, one can infer there's no preschool students here just because neither of those three lines seem to say so. But in the previous slide, the bar chart, it would be helpful, Dr. Hackett, just given how this might get publicly consumed, to just clarify this is K-12 or put some footnote about what's excluded. And then with respect to that, that other category, it really was peculiar, and I only discovered this today, that in years past, the DESE enrollment reports did have a column, I think it was called SP, for some of our special education students. That amounted to, gosh, in some years anywhere from 60, 70, 80 students. Those columns are still there even when you go back into prior years. However, they've all been zeroed out. So it's a little bit of a head scratcher, and would be interesting to know if DESE has subsequently gone back and taken those students and sort of put them somewhere else, or if they're just off the grid completely. Given how some folks in our community like to kind of compare our numbers to DESE, it would be good to just understand how that change has actually happened. So that's something would be good for us to figure out. But anyway, that was it.
Thanks, Mr. Nixon. Mr. Brady.
Thank you. Just a real quick question. I was wondering, as of the October 1 count, what was our total for kindergarten? I know we had been thinking it would be around 300. What did the actual number end up being?
We landed, I believe, Andrew or Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, around 240, 249.
Yeah, it was 249, right?
Great. Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the committee?
I just have a related one to that, to the question Mr. Brady just asked. It'd be interesting to understand if that number, that kindergarten enrollment number, does that largely scale with what we saw for the pre-screenings for kindergarten in the spring? In other words, did we have a lower turnout for that, or did we have kind of the number that we thought, but then after screenings for kindergarten, kids either did they go elsewhere, or are they getting redshirted?
I just anecdotally, because would say that the number from pre-screening was pretty solid with what we had seen in years past. We did not get the number of registrations after the screening process over the course of the summer. We didn't see the bump that we have seen in previous years.
So that's interesting, right? Because that just reassures us the kids are physically here because they showed up at a school for screening, and so they either they're held back a year, or they went somewhere else. They went private, right? It's one of those two.
Yeah, or if they exist, right?
Well, presumably they exist, just because, as you said, our screening numbers were pretty robust.
But I guess I don't understand the point that you're making. You mean in terms of the differential between the actual total when school opened in previous years?
Right. So in other words, in any given year, we might see, in some years we saw incredible gains in kindergarten. Those gains corresponded with a surge in screenings for kindergarten in the previous spring. Conversely, if we see a significant drop in the number of screenings for kindergarten, we're going to expect kindergarten registration is going to drop. I think my point is, if the screening numbers were pretty much what we were expecting, and therefore we were projecting an enrollment, as you just said, around 300, if those actual numbers came in lower, to me, it just suggests those kids who showed up for screenings, they either got held back a year or they went somewhere else, but they're physically here, right? Or am I missing something?
So the screening numbers, I think, I don't quote me, but I believe we ended up screening about 220 kindergarten students. So the differential would have been about additional 30 students that showed up in September. In years past, you've had anywhere from 60 to 80 students show up over the course of the summer in kindergarten, but generally you've screened around 220, 230.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And when I say you, I mean us. Sorry.
The district, the Royal V.
The Royal V.
Miss Bolognese.
I was just wondering if usually we see an increase in the first grade students from kindergarten, or going from kindergarten to first grade. And so is the increase this year, which I think looks like it's 25 students, is that typical? Or have we seen, I guess, what's that trend like over the years?
The trend is relatively typical to the trend that we see students who may have been in a private kindergarten placement. We generally see the bump we have prior to, over years past, seen the bump at grade 2 as well, more significantly at grade 2.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for sharing those with us this evening, Dr. Hackett. I know that once those get up on the DESE website, I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to look at them again and a little more closely. And with that, I would like to invite Mr. Rowe to share an FY23 budget versus actual update. And I think you're going to take us through what some of our big areas to look at are here, right, Mr. Rowe?
Yes, thank you. So, it's appropriate that we look at this right after we look at our student numbers, because it's generally the student numbers that are going to drive a lot of the decision making. The way we've laid out this presentation tonight is to have the boxes that you see in front of you. If you look at the box to the left, what we're carrying is the 23 budget as voted. So that you see that we have personnel services of 52.8 million, other expenses at 8 million, and a total appropriation of 60.9 million. In the middle box, we put the actual expenditures as projected with our current staffing, and then carrying and also looking at within our special education tuition account, which is really the biggest variable that we'll find in our expense category. It's as you see, of the 8 million, it's a significant piece, budgeted at 2.6. We're carrying that at a projection as well. Most of the other expenses we're carrying at budget because the larger elements such as transportation and some other services generally look to be at this point that they'd be coming in on budget. So the major variable in terms of getting an initial projection is really looking at our staffing and understanding who's in place and where they're in place. And generally that's settled out by October with full staffing, so that we've done this projection based on the data that we had late October through about our fourth payroll. So that what you'll see is that on a budget of, as I said, 60.9 million, we're projecting right now to expend in the neighborhood of 60.7 million, meaning we're in the neighborhood of 186,000 flex in that, which is about 0.3%. So we're very close to projecting on budget at this point. This projection, as you'll see in the box that lists staffing with projected against actual, shows that we built a budget on 634.2 full-time equivalent staff. And on this projection, we currently have 635.8 positions in place, which is just 1.6 over the targeted budget that we originally presented. And as you go down the various cost centers, you'll see that if you go the central office, we're as planned. High school and middle school were just off by some fractions. And the other important thing to think about is that when we looked at the trends in student enrollment for both high and middle school, you notice that the actual enrollment was up in the neighborhood of 30 students or so. We've been able to accommodate those students in the original staffing plan budgeted at approximately those numbers. The one area where we had some variability, or really there's two areas where we had some what I'd call significant variability. You may recall we had a lot of conversations as we were finalizing this budget with the town's finance committee on what our staffing would be at the elementary level. Last year we had 110 general education classrooms. We committed to reducing that to 107, and that was the budget we voted. In fact, we have right now 103 general education classrooms at the elementary level. So we actually reduced below that number by 4 positions, which are reflected in the numbers. You'll see slightly under budget at Ambrose, Lincoln, and Morocco. You'll see the reduction of 4. Those resources were directed toward special education needs that we had. And so that when we look within the detail of our special education department, where we budgeted 213, but we have actual 218, we increased our occupational therapists by 1.8 positions this year, and we have 3.1 additional positions at our special education area targeted to the elementary schools for support that area. And so generally, the other cost centers are as planned, and we're, as I say, 1.8 in terms of total FTEs. Now this, in terms of teaching positions, they're essentially all filled. Administrative, most of our administrative, such as clerical, and those are carried in this projection as filled. We certainly are still in a situation where our educational support professional positions, we're still struggling to fill all of those. So we'll have some variability in that. And as we go forward this year, we may see a pattern as we did last year where we have some experiences where we're not filling those all on a continuous basis. But most of the other professional positions are at least currently filled, and we will experience the normal variability that we have with leaves of absences and other changes in the course of the year. But generally speaking, in terms of both spending and in terms of positions, we're pretty much on target with our original plan, with those exceptions that I just pointed out. Additionally, in the budget document that I provided to you, we have detail in each of the cost centers, which we can use to answer any questions. If you have any questions from having reviewed the report, and I'd be glad to talk about that if you have any specific questions.
I would just share that Mr. Mahoney was doing his part, the high school being the voting central today. He sent me a picture of a whiteboard advertising ESP or paraprofessional support positions. One arrow was to, here's how you go vote. The other arrow was, here's how you can go apply for an open position. So he was hard at work with that today. So,
Like outside the box thinking.
yeah, we're almost inside the box. Old school.
Are there any questions from the committee on any of the information Mr. Rose presented, or any of the information that was in your packets about the
I
effort?
could add, sorry to cut you off, just
That's
one
okay.
other thing. Remember, we carry in our central office a provision for collective bargaining, and that's still there, as you would expect. The other thing is, I know that we've had conversations about asking the committee to vote an adjusted budget based on an update. I'd be hesitant to do that at this point. I think we need to see how things settle out a little more. And the other issue that we'll have to talk about down the road is these numbers will change in terms of the allocation by departments once a contract is settled, and we've allocated those dollars from the central administration to the school. So we should have conversations as we move forward about what's the right time for the committee to decide whether they want to vote an adjusted budget for the year.
And Mr. Rowe, when in your experience does that generally happen? It seems that the late October, early November is early for that.
It depends on the year. I mean, if we had a settled contract, we could do it, let's say, before the end of the month. If not, we can make a decision. Do we want to leave the existing budget as is until there's a settlement, which could be, a period of time from now, or do we want to take action? And it's really, it's a pick 'em.
Mr. Nixon.
Sure. Just on that note, I'm an advocate for leaving things as they are and let the collective bargaining process play itself out. And I apologize. I'm going to throw a question at Mr. Rowe. I should know the answer to, but tell me what, under the athletics line 120, what does that 547 actually represent? And why, for instance, are we not showing anything under personal services? So like, is our athletic director being carried under central office and there's some administrative support for athletics, or is that buried in the high school line? And then of course we have stipends for coaches. So are those then carried under other expenses?
They're not carried under either. Remember, the 547,000 that we carry in the general fund is matched by approximately an equal amount. That's the revenue that we receive from the players, so that every child who is on a team pays a fee. So that's about a $550,000 addition. And so what we're looking at here is staffing that we budget and pay out of the general fund. Historically, the athletic director has been carried in the revolving fund component. So that, and to your point, we also have a couple of other grants. We have a Title I grant in which we carry 0.8 full-time equivalents of teaching staff. We have our preschool staff who we carry, off the top of my head, I want to say it's about 5 full-time equivalents. It's a mix of teachers and ESPs. And we carry some small components of full-time equivalents of music teachers in a fee-for-service revolving fund as well. So that those FTEs, those personnel are not reflected in this general fund budget. And to your question, I guess it's more stylistic and historical that the athletic director hasn't been carried in this presentation. I did realize when I was working on a chart that the town's finance committee had put together, I guess they put it together annually last year as we were finalizing the budget, where they were carrying the athletic director. And it's fair to say, yes, we have an athletic director, so, but it's carried in the revolving fund component.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions about this information? Okay, thank you. I'd just like to let the committee know that we will begin having our finance subcommittee also begin to meet with the education working group of the finance committee as we work towards our FY24 budget, and those meetings will begin shortly. Our acting town manager is also begun a budget summit meeting where she is also sharing out town budget information with the chairs of the school committee and the select board and the finance committee. So all of those discussions will be ongoing. And Dr. Hackett, could you bring up the agenda again for me? I've got it. Next up on the agenda is a consideration of warrant signatures. We can vote on this tonight if we like. Otherwise, I can provide information to you and the finance committee can take it back and discuss it and come back forward. But I had just wanted to share some information that I had learned about reviewing our current process and allowable best practices on signing warrants. Per the MASC guidance, school committee is allowed to actually vote a single member to sign our warrants. It expedites processing while still allowing oversight of the whole warrant for the committee as a whole. I did actually have a brief conversation with Mr. Rowe about this because while our warrants have been signed, our process has been a little bit inconsistent of late through the transition to a new superintendent and finance manager. And we'd like to try to button up the process on that as much as we can to make sure we're getting warrants signed regularly and getting them back out in a way that is helpful to everyone involved. So I just wanted to sort of open up the conversation on that to the committee. We have had, our practice in the past has been that When I started on the committee, all 5 members of this committee signed our warrants. We have also gone with a quorum of the committee in the past, and I just wanted to introduce this idea that we could delegate it to a single member of the committee that could then work with Mr. Rowe to make sure that these got signed. Mr. Nixon.
So I would say for many years, we were good about at least providing the opportunity for the full committee to review warrants. We didn't necessarily all have to sign them. I think by law, we have to have a quorum. So 3 or 4 signatures, was always enough.
We do not, actually. That's what I'm saying. We do not have to have a quorum of the committee sign the warrants if we vote to designate a single member to do so. And
no, that's what I'm
MASC
saying.
yeah.
Yes, absent our decision to allow one to sign, we have to have a quorum, is what I'm
Right.
saying. And so at some meetings, 4 or 5 people really wanted to pour through them and 4 or 5 signed, but our finance director was always quick to say, I'm good if I just have 3 signatures, because that's really all that was required. I will make an observation, though, that when COVID hit, we pivoted and we did vote to designate the chair at the time. This is some time ago now, because COVID's been with us for a while, so not describing the current chair, that we voted to give the chair the authority to review and sign warrants. And that happened for a period of time, but there were subsequent reorganizations. And my understanding is we went some distance without a member of the committee reviewing those warrants. And so it concerns me only because if we were to vote to give that authority to one, there's some important responsibility there. And I feel the way we've done it in the past is fine to sort of have them physically present. We can all review them if we'd like to, but a quorum is all that's necessary. And because although tonight's meeting, obviously an exception, we generally are now meeting in person. So my preference would be to sort of do it the old fashioned way and give Peter 3 signatures.
I will add that MASC recommends that we actually don't use that process. So MASC recommends that we do not actually sign them at a school committee table. That if we're going to use that process, that members would need to go to the finance office to Mr. Rowe and have an opportunity to sit and review them. But they said that it is actually the worst practice to sign them just around the committee table. So I will ask that if that is what this committee chooses to do, that we remove that from the actual meeting and that people will go to the business office to actually review and sign those. Mr. Hopcroft.
Well, this might be moot given what you just said. I was going to ask through you to Mr. Nixon whether following that process, but having a minimum of 1, if we vote for 1 to sign it, if that would be acceptable, because people could still see it. And so I guess I'll amend that and say, going down to the finance office and doing that. Would that feel comfortable?
Well, I mean, to be clear, the way we did it in the past, they weren't actually signed as part of the meeting, but it was usually when the meeting was over, the warrants were there, they were distributed. And in some instances, committee members, really took some time to review them. And sometimes important questions were asked. I can only think of a couple of instances when a committee member's question actually drove a change in the warrant as it was prepared. But, the value is, in my mind, simply for the committee to see the reporting and to ask questions and become better informed about how the finances are structured, where we allocate resources, why we allocate resources the way that we do. But there are, as I think members know, there are some lines that can change over the year. And so to be able to tie that back to our earlier discussion with Mr. Rowe, either an approved budget or an amended budget, which we would typically vote in the fall, I think was certainly very beneficial. So my preference would be we sort of stick with doing it the way we've done it. I appreciate what Ms. Bergstrom is sharing. I don't think it makes a lot of sense for 5 members to pour over them in a hurried fashion at 10 o'clock at night at Parkhurst. So having them available in Peter's office makes a lot of sense. And I do think members should review them in advance, but I think administration also needs to be clear with the school committee and say, you know, look, they're prepared, here's where you can look at them, and we need to have them signed by such and such a date, and give us a reasonable amount of time to get there and look at them.
Ms. Bolognese.
I was just wondering, is there some process that had come out of the MASC meeting to close the loop with school committee, where there's like if a single member were signing the warrants, is there like a report out back to the school committee, some sort of summary?
They recommend that you can have the warrants listed as a consent agenda item. And then the committee acknowledges that they have had opportunity to see and review the warrants. Mr. Hopcroft.
If I could, again, through the chair, to Mr. Nixon, just trying to understand your concern. Is it one of access or of oversight? You know, if all committee members had access and the ability to view the warrants, would that be sufficient, even if the requirement was only that one? Yeah, I want to make, I guess in my mind, I'm thinking I want to make sure that the process is moving along so that we're getting them, you know, we're complying with the process and signing them and so on and so forth. And so, you know, I'm wondering if access to all committee members was available, noticed, et cetera, but one committee member had to sign off, or is the concern more that we're putting too much responsibility on one committee member and they may not do their job? And although I think that would be worse if you needed three, but I guess that was my question.
Well, so I appreciate it. It's not really one of access. I mean, I feel like administration would do whatever we're asking them to do in terms of making them available. It really is an important oversight function for school committee. So at the end of the day, we vote a budget, and I think our community expects us to have some oversight to ensure that what's being spent is what we expected would be spent. I know the current chair and maybe another member of the committee have some memories of instances in the past in which prior superintendents have pushed a document in front of, you know, the chair of the committee and said, need you to sign this. You got to sign it tonight. And there has been pushback. And I'm not talking specifically about warrants, but other documents. And so there have been moments where committee members have said, wait a minute, pump the brakes, need to understand this better. What is this? Why is this necessary? And in some instances, those questions have actually caused a bit of a pivot and a new and, let's say, more appropriate understanding. So I think it's helpful to the community for there to be at least a quorum of the school committee reviewing the warrants. It doesn't have to be the same three people. At the end of the day, all Peter needs is 3 signatures, whether it's 3, 4, or 5. It's part of our job. It's not glamorous. It's not glamorous at all. And prior finance directors have always said, look, I'm here to answer questions. And the kinds of questions that come up in the past from school committee have really been more just sort of about process and procedure. You know, is it policy that we do it this way? Is it practice that we do it this way? And those are really good questions, because I think it leads to a more informed school committee.
And to be clear, Mr. Nixon, it's not, we are not giving up the responsibility of doing that by designating one person to sign them. We're allowing the warrant process to move forward at all times. All members of this committee would still bear the weight and responsibility of the knowledge of those, I just flipped, the knowledge of those warrants and what's contained in them, and could still have the process of taking the time to sit down, review them, and ask questions. The designating a single individual would just allow them to move forward faster. Mr. Brady.
Thank you. I just wanted to note, I do agree that however we go about it, we need to help the district be able to move forward faster on the warrants. I think that it's always problematic when we're holding them up or they're being held up. That's kind of a systematic problem in school systems and, you know, in general in town government, being slow about things and needing to get approval. So however we can speed it up, I'm definitely in support of. I don't want them being hung up trying to do things and pay people, especially reimbursing people. If you've ever tried to get reimbursed by a school system, it's not a fun task. It can take a real long time, and it's pretty insulting, frankly, to people to have to wait months to get reimbursed for something that they put their own money out for. Because it's been well beyond a month. So if they put it on a credit card, they've paid it off already and they're just waiting to get their money back. My one wonder is there, it is 2022, almost 2023. Is there a way that we can receive the warrants electronically so we can look at them and we don't have to come and look at a printout of paper? That would just be, I think, a really nice thing. Probably not an easy thing to do next week, but maybe something we could make a goal to move towards in the future. Because I do like anything that might speed up the process and make it easier for people to review things.
Mr. Rowe, are those available electronically? Does our Munis system allow that?
The answer is yes. We could share the warrant electronically. I'd have to see if there's any reason why we shouldn't, but I don't believe, I'm not familiar with a reason why it couldn't be done. But the answer is we do have it electronically. We can always PDF the document to share. We'd have to kind of have a team back and figure out what the timing should be and those kinds of things. But I believe that would be possible.
Mr. Hopcroft, thank you.
Madam Chair, curious, MASC permits us to have a single signer. Do they have a recommendation as to whether this is a best practice or otherwise?
That it was their recommendation as the best practice, was that we do have a single signer with everyone, or at least the finance subcommittee could be designated also as the signers if your committee has one. I was going to make the recommendation that people have asked a lot of great questions here tonight, and I really appreciate hearing from everybody about their interests and concerns about this, and that we seem to share a common interest in being able to move these forward more quickly for the district. My recommendation would be that Finance Subcommittee go back and talk to both MASBO and MASC and establish a process for this that we could bring back and recommend to the committee. I appreciate hearing those questions first, because that would make that makes our job easier in doing that. And if that feels okay to everyone, that would be my recommendation at this time. Mr. Hopcroft.
Okay, just one other question.
Sure.
As this is being sent off to committee to think about for Mr. Through the chair, Mr. Rowe. We can receive them electronically. Do you know if there's a mechanism for us signing them electronically?
It's not something we've done. We would have to process them through DocuSign. I'd have to, kind of get back and determine whether that makes sense, but I think logistically it could be done. I think Ms. Bergstrom comment about using the finance subcommittee to, talk it through a little more in terms of the logistics may make some sense, but I think that's a possibility, yes.
We could definitely do it through DocuSign. The question really is whether the town will accept a digital signature on the warrants.
Right.
That too, yeah.
So it sounds like Finance Subcommittee has some tasks to accomplish then, if that's the consensus of the committee. And really, just as Mr. Brady said, being able to streamline these processes for both this committee and the town and the district in any way we can, given that it is 2022, just seems to make some sense to me. Any other comments before we move on? Thank you, everyone. That was really, really helpful. The next thing on the agenda is you should have all received a draft of my town meeting presentation. I had shared that electronically with you earlier. If there were any comments or concerns that anybody had, the town moderator has asked that committees do review the slides before they're presented at town meeting this year. And just be able to offer any input or advice before we move forward. So I am happy to receive any of that right now, or if anybody would like to connect with me offline or Dr. Hackett offline, I'm happy to do that as well. Okay, excellent. Then I think we have been incredibly efficient this evening. Our next anticipated agenda items, this is for the next regular school committee meeting, would be to look again at our school committee goals and the FY23 mid-year report. Our future meeting dates are actually November 10th at 6:30, would be just before town meeting. I would like to hear from the committee after I go through this, if that's a meeting we think is going to be necessary to hold. And then our next regularly scheduled meeting is November 22nd. That is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I believe. So just be aware of that. Does anybody have any comments on meeting before town meeting? I'd like to hear if there's a consensus of the committee to do so. Mr. Brady.
Just thinking about, what we have done recently before town meeting, I can't really think of anything that we'd need to discuss and vote on, but that's as of today. So I guess things could come up between now and then, but looking at what is coming before us, I'm not sure we would need to meet.
I'm happy to hold the meeting and let people know day of as well if something would change between now and then. I'm feeling the same way you are, Mr. Brady. I think we've taken our positions on things that are applicable to the school committee. I can't see anything additional coming up. Mr. Nixon, do you have any updated information on Lynch you'll need to be sharing with us that evening?
No, well, no substantive updates, although just related to town meeting, I will share that the moderator is taking Article 14 and 15 as the first orders of business on night number 2. So it is expected that the Lynch Articles 12 and 13, if they are taken up on the second night of town meeting, will be in the second half or maybe third of the evening. Certainly possible it could be the first order of business on evening number 3, but we're not expecting it's going to be coming up on the first evening of town meeting. In fact, our consultants will not be there on the first evening.
Okay. Good. Thank you for that. And with that, so I will let everyone know, we'll hold that, but it doesn't appear that we will probably need to meet just before town meeting. I did also want to let you know that as members of this committee, we have invited the student representatives to join us to sit with us at town meeting, and I will introduce them to town meeting at the top of our presentation. They are both very excited to do this and to have an opportunity to sit with us and participate in town meeting in that way. I'm always happy to share town government with eager young students and convince them that this might be something they want to participate in someday. So I am grateful that they are enthusiastic about that as well. We then will need to adjourn to executive session for purpose 3 to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Winchester Education Association, because to do so in open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the committee. We will adjourn this meeting directly from executive session. Dr. Hackett.
Yes, ma'am.
Will you be sending us a link for that?
As soon as we end this meeting, I'll set you'll receive a link from me.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll
So
take
move to adjourn for the reasons stated by the chair.
Second.
I said that first.
all in favor, Mr. Hopcroft,
Aye.
Mr. Brady,
Aye.
Miss Bolognese,
Aye.
Mr. Nixon.
Aye.
Chair votes aye and the vote is unanimous. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us, Miss Kirby and Miss Elenema tonight too.
Good night.
Good
Night.
night.